A wooden chair in the corner. That's all the space they left for me after years of calling me family. 3 days of watching their dog take my seat, my bed, my place in their lives. Months later, they finally texted, "Please, don't shut us out." But they didn't realize I'd already let go the night I left their spare key behind. We met in graduate school, three misfit scholars who found each other during orientation week, huddled near the coffee table, making quiet jokes about the pompous department head. Back then they weren't a couple yet, just my two closest friends who happened to be slowly falling for each other while I watched with amusement and affection. Our friendship was effortless. Weekend brunches that stretched into dinner. Late night walks around campus solving the world's problems. A spare key to their apartment that I used so often, it felt like my second home. When they finally started dating, nothing changed. I was never the third wheel, just the third part of something whole. We shared everything: professional setbacks, family drama, romantic disasters. They held me when my parent died, appearing at my door with grocery bags and staying for a week, cooking meals I couldn't taste through grief, but needed to survive. I helped them move 3 times, my back aching from carrying boxes up narrow stairwells, laughing about their endless collection of books. When I got the job offer in another state, we cried together on their balcony, passing a bottle of wine back and forth until sunrise. Nothing will change, we promised each other. We're family now. For the first year, it was true. Weekend visits every month or two. Daily texts. Video calls that lasted hours. Then the visits stretched to every 3 months. The calls shortened. Life was happening. My new job consumed me, and they were building their own world together. 2 years ago, they adopted their dog. I saw photos of the three of them, a new family forming. I was genuinely happy for them. They needed that something to love together, something that was just theirs. And I had my new life too. But somewhere inside, a quiet voice whispered that something was shifting, plates moving beneath the surface of our friendship. The anticipation had been building for weeks. 3 days together, our first real visit in almost 6 months. I'd cleared my calendar, packed thoughtfully, even splurged on an expensive gift. As I pulled into their driveway, I could feel my smile stretching wide enough to hurt. Their house looked exactly as I remembered it. The blue trim they'd painted together last summer, the wind chimes I'd sent for their anniversary. When the door swung open, the sound of their voices wrapped around me like a blanket. For a moment, everything was perfect. And then I met their dog. Not for the first time. I'd seen him on video calls, cooed pictures, heard stories. But this was our first real introduction. A big golden brown lab with soulful eyes and a wagging tail that seemed capable of clearing coffee tables. They beamed with pride as he circled me, sniffing enthusiastically at my suitcase. "He's our baby," my friend said, reaching down to ruffle his ears. There was something in her voice I'd never heard before, a tenderness reserved for the most precious things in life. "He's beautiful," I replied, reaching out to pet him. And he was. I've always loved animals, always planned to have pets of my own someday. That first hour was a blur of hugs and overlapping conversations, catching up on months of life lived apart. But something felt off, a subtle recalibration happening in real time. Every few minutes, one of them would interrupt our conversation to praise the dog, redirect him, or simply pause to watch him with naked adoration. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Of course they loved their dog, that was normal and healthy. My discomfort was just adjustment, the natural awkwardness of stepping back into lives that had continued evolving without me. The first real moment of unease came that evening. We'd moved to the living room with drinks, ready for hours of conversation. "Why?" I paused, scanning the room for a place to sit. My friends had already settled into their recliners, matching La Z boys they'd splurged on last year. The love seat seemed the obvious choice, but their dog was stretched across it, head resting on the armrest. I hovered uncertainly, drink in hand. "Where should I began. My friend gestured toward a small wooden chair in the corner, the kind meant for decoration more than comfort. I always joked it was their time-out chair because nobody ever actually sat in it. "That works," he said. "Or the floor's comfortable too." I laughed, assuming he was joking, and moved toward the love seat. "Hey, buddy, mind if I join you?" I said to the dog, gently attempting to coax him to move over. Both my friends' faces changed simultaneously. "Ha, good luck with that. That's his spot. He ain't moving for no one." They laughed together, a private joke I wasn't part of. I stood there, feeling oddly exposed, before awkwardly lowering myself onto the wooden chair. It was uncomfortable, hard and straight-backed with a thin cushion that did little to soften the wood beneath. But I smiled and raised my glass. To finally being together again, I said. For the next 3 hours I shifted continuously, trying to find comfort on the unyielding surface. Eventually, when the pain in my back became too intense, I moved to the floor, leaning against the wall. Neither of them seemed to notice or care that I was the only human without proper seating. I told myself I was overreacting. It's just a chair. It's just one evening. But something had changed in the atmosphere. An invisible barrier had formed. For the first time in our friendship, I felt like a guest rather than family. A guest who ranked below their pet in the household hierarchy. I'd planned the second day carefully, wanting to make it special. I'd arranged for an expensive gourmet charcuterie board to be delivered, my friend's absolute favorite indulgence. When the doorbell rang, and I brought in the elaborate spread, her eyes lit up with genuine delight. "You remembered," she exclaimed, examining the artfully arranged meats, cheeses, fruits, and nuts. For a moment, the tension from the previous night dissolved. This was use, the thoughtful gestures, the perfect understanding of each other's pleasures. As we unwrapped the package, I felt a wave of relief. We were going to be okay. The feeling lasted approximately 30 seconds. Oh, my friend's face fell as she picked through the arrangement. "There are grapes. Dogs can't have grapes. They're toxic." Before I could respond, they were both methodically removing every grape from the board, dropping them into the trash can. "Sorry," her partner said, not meeting my eyes. "We have to be careful." I nodded, watching as nearly a quarter of the expensive arrangement was discarded. "Of course, safety first. There's still plenty." The sentence died in my throat as their dog approached the table, tail wagging. Without hesitation, my friend lowered the board to his level. "Look what we've got, buddy." "Treats." I watched in mute disbelief as the dog began eating directly from the board, his mouth leaving saliva on the cheeses, his tongue lapping at the meats I'd selected specifically for human palates. "You guys don't want to put some on a plate first?" I suggested weakly. They looked at me with genuine confusion. "Why? It's just us," my friend said. "We do this all the time. Just us." The phrase echoed in my mind. Just use, a unit that apparently included their dog but somehow excluded me. I forced a smile and reached for my wine glass instead of the food. Throughout the evening, the dog returned repeatedly to the board, helping himself whenever he wanted. My friends didn't seem to notice my growing discomfort, or the fact that I'd stopped eating entirely. They were too busy narrating their pet's behavior, laughing at his preferences, treating his every movement as endlessly fascinating. I drank too much wine that night, hoping it would soften the edges of my disappointment. It didn't. Sleep eluded me that first night. The guest room, which I'd stayed in many times before, had been transformed. A large dog bed occupied one corner, and various toys were scattered across the floor. But the dog wasn't using his bed. He was stretched across the bottom half of the daybed where I was expected to sleep. When my friends showed me to the room, they'd proudly announce, "This is Kane's room too, just so you know. He likes to sleep on the bed, but don't worry, he'll share." I'd nodded, not knowing what else to do. Asking them to have their dog sleep elsewhere seemed impossible, given their earlier reactions. So I spent the night curled into a tight ball on one end of the small bed, trying not to disturb the animal, who occasionally growled in his sleep, or stretched his legs into my space. By morning, my back ached, and dark circles shadowed my eyes. I'd maybe gotten 3 hours of interrupted sleep, but I was determined to make the best of it. This visit meant too much to let discomfort ruin it. "Did you sleep okay?" my friend asked over coffee. I hesitated, then decided honesty might help. Actually, it was a little tight with both of us on the daybed. I was wondering if maybe Kane could sleep in his dog bed just while I'm here. The temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. They exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. "This is his house and his space," my friend said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "We're not uprooting him just because we decided to have a guest. We decided to have a guest. Not our dear friend is visiting. Not someone we love is staying with us. A guest, an imposition, an intrusion into their real family unit." "Of course," I said quickly. "I understand. It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Throughout the day, I noticed other boundaries, or rather, the complete lack of them. The dog jumped on counters, pawed at my legs during conversations, interrupted every quiet moment with demands for attention that were immediately granted. When I returned from a shower to find my suitcase upended and one of my shoes destroyed, teeth marks puncturing the leather, the heel completely separated, I finally reached my breaking point. "Is there somewhere I can put my things where he can't get to them?" I asked, holding up the mangled shoe. My friend shrugged. "Welcome to dog ownership. Nothing is safe." "I'm not a dog owner," I pointed out gently. "I'm just visiting. These are my work shoes." "You should have closed the door better," her partner said, not looking up from his phone. "He can nudge doors open if they're not latched." No apology. No offer to replace what had been destroyed. No recognition that perhaps, just perhaps, they had some responsibility to protect their guests' belongings in their home. I retreated to the bathroom, tears threatening. When had these people, who once understood me better than anyone in the world, become strangers? When had our bond, which had weathered geographical distance and life changes, become so brittle? That night, I secretly moved all my remaining belongings to a utility closet at the end of the hall, the only door with a lock I could find. I didn't tell them. Somehow, that small act of self-protection felt like giving up, like acknowledgement that something fundamental had broken between us. By the third day, I was exhausted, physically from the lack of sleep, emotionally from the constant feeling of being an unwelcome intrusion. I kept thinking about the plans we'd made for this visit, the restaurants we'd try, the hiking trail we'd walk, the long conversations that would bridge the gap that time and distance had created. None of it was happening. Every activity revolved around the dog, where he could go, what he could do, how long he could be left alone, which was apparently not at all. Our conversations were constantly interrupted by their commentary on his behavior, his needs, his moods. It wasn't just that they loved their dog. It was that loving him seemed to have consumed the people they used to be. People who could talk for hours about books and ideas, who cared about my life and thoughts, who made space for me in their world. The final straw came quietly, almost anticlimactically. We were sitting in the living room, once again on the uncomfortable wooden chair, them in their recliners, the dog sprawled across the loveseat. I was telling them about a professional challenge I'd been facing, a situation that had kept me awake with anxiety for weeks. Midway through my story, the dog jumped off the loveseat and wandered over to his water bowl. Both my friends immediately stopped listening to me, their heads swiveling to watch him drink. "Look at his little tongue," one cooed. "He's such a good boy." They continued commenting on his drinking technique for nearly a minute, while my sentence hung unfinished in the air. When the dog finished and wandered back to the loveseat, they turned to me with blank expressions. "Sorry, what were you saying?" my friend asked. And I realized with perfect clarity, they weren't interested anymore. Not in my life, not in my thoughts, not in maintaining the connection that had once seemed unbreakable. They'd found something new to love, and that love had somehow replaced rather than expanded their capacity for connection. In that moment, I made my decision. "I think I need to head home early," I said quietly. Their reactions were telling, not shock or disappointment, but mild confusion followed quickly by defensiveness. "Is something wrong?" my friend asked, but her tone suggested she already knew the answer and was preparing her counter-arguments. "I'm just not comfortable here," I admitted. "I feel like there's no space for me anymore, literally and figuratively." "You're not used to pet life," her partner said dismissively. "If you ever want a dog in the future, you'd better get used to these sacrifices." As if sleeping on half a bed, eating food covered in dog saliva, and having my belongings destroyed were normal expectations for any visitor. "I don't think this is about me not understanding pet ownership," I said carefully. "I think it's about boundaries and consideration. I feel like I'm intruding here, and that's not how visiting old friends should feel." They exchanged that look again, the private communication of people who've created a world with walls I could no longer breach. "If you can't accept our family the way it is, then maybe it is better if you leave," my friend said, her voice cold in a way I'd never heard directed at me before. Family. Not our pet, not our dog. Our family, a unit that clearly didn't include me anymore. I packed my things in silence. They hovered awkwardly, offering occasional justifications that sounded more like accusations. "We've changed. You don't understand our life now." Real friends would adapt. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps real friendship would mean accepting this new dynamic without question. But as I placed my remaining shoe in my suitcase, I wondered if real friendship shouldn't go both ways. If perhaps they could have made some small accommodations for someone who had once been as essential to their lives as I had been to theirs. At 3 a.m., I placed my spare key on their kitchen counter. The gesture felt enormously symbolic, relinquishing physical access to a space where I no longer belonged emotionally. I drove away in the rain, tears finally flowing freely, mourning something precious that had slipped away so gradually I hadn't noticed until it was gone. The weeks following my early departure were filled with silence. No texts, no calls. Just the occasional social media updates showing them with their dog, hiking trails I would never walk with them, celebrating holidays I would no longer share. I waited for anger to fill the void, but it never came. Instead, I felt a profound sadness, a grief for something that couldn't be recovered. We had been essential to each other once, necessary as air, present in all the crucial moments. Now we were strangers with shared memories. In quiet moments, I replayed our history, searching for the inflection point. When we started drifting. Was it really about the dog, or was he just the physical manifestation of something that had been happening for years? Perhaps distance had already created the crack, and this visit had simply revealed what was already broken. Friends asked why I'd suddenly stopped mentioning them. I gave vague answers about growing apart. The truth felt too complicated, too revealing, not just of them, but of me. Of my expectation that friendships should remain static, that the people we love shouldn't change in ways that exclude us. After a month of silence, a text arrived. "We're sorry things got weird. We love Kane so much, and we just wanted you to love him too." No acknowledgement of how I'd been treated, no recognition of the deeper issues. Just a statement that positioned me as the problem, the one who couldn't embrace their new reality. I started typing a dozen different responses. Angry ones. Hurt ones. Lengthy explanations of all the ways they'd made me feel unwelcome and unimportant. But each attempt felt like extending a conversation that had already reached its natural conclusion. In the end, I simply wrote, "I understand loving him. I just wish there had still been room for me." They never replied. 6 months have passed. The acute pain has faded, replaced by occasional melancholy when memories surface unexpectedly. I find myself wondering about them, about whether they ever reflect on what was lost, whether they miss me in quiet moments the way I sometimes miss them. I've started volunteering at an animal shelter on weekends. There's a certain irony in that, I suppose. But I've always loved animals, always planned to have pets of my own someday. The experience has taught me something important. Loving an animal deeply doesn't require erasing boundaries or displacing other relationships. The shelter staff maintain clear rules and training protocols, while still treating the animals with tremendous affection. Recently, I adopted a cat, an older tabby with one eye and a surprisingly dignified demeanor. He sleeps at the foot of my bed sometimes, but never on my pillow. He has his own food dishes. He doesn't destroy my belongings. We've found a balance that works for both of us, a relationship built on mutual respect for each other's space and needs. When friends visit, I make sure there's comfortable seating for everyone. I check if they have allergies or fears. I create space where connections can flourish without resentment or discomfort. It's not difficult, it's just consideration. Sometimes I imagine running into my old friends years from now. I wonder what we would say to each other, whether the passage of time would allow us to see more clearly what happened between us. There's a part of me that hopes for reconciliation, not a return to what was, but perhaps a new understanding based on who we've all become. But I've stopped waiting for that moment. Stopped checking their social media. Stopped expecting a message that might never come. Instead, I'm learning to appreciate the friends who make space for me in their lives, not at the expense of their other loves, but alongside them. People who understand that hearts can expand to include new attachments without displacing old ones. The truth I finally accepted is bittersweet. Some friendships, no matter how profound they once seemed, have natural conclusions. Not dramatic endings with shouted accusations, but quiet fade-outs, where paths that once ran parallel simply diverge until they no longer intersect. I still miss them sometimes, not the people they became, but the people they were. The ones who knew all my stories and still wanted to hear them again. The ones who made space for me without being asked. I hope, wherever their path takes them, they find happiness. I hope their dog brings them all the joy they clearly believe he does. And I hope they occasionally remember the person who used to be a third part of their world, who loved them enough to leave when it became clear there was no longer room for her to stay. Last week, I found the spare key. It had slipped into the lining of my suitcase, a small brass reminder of what once was. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight, remembering all the times I'd used it to let myself into their old apartment, calling out my arrival, being greeted with delighted welcomes. I could have mailed it back, could have used it as an excuse to reach out, to see if time had softened the edges of our parting. Instead, I drove to the lake where the three of us used to picnic on summer evenings. I stood at the edge of the water, key warm in my hand from being clutched too tightly. The ripples spread outward when the key hit the water, concentric circles expanding and fading, just like the impact we have on each other's lives. Not erased, but transformed into something less tangible, memories instead of presence. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt something shift inside me, a tension releasing, a door gently closing. Not with anger or resentment, but with acceptance that some chapters end so others can begin. That the space between us, once measured in shared breaths and heartbeats, had grown too vast a bridge. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter. Not happy exactly, but at peace with what had been lost and what remained, the indelible mark they'd left on my life, the ways they'd shaped me, the lessons I'd carry forward into new relationships. Some people are in our lives for a season, some for a reason, some for a lifetime. They've been all three for me. And despite everything, I was grateful for that.